Okay, let's open in prayer. Oh Lord God, we do thank you for that you have revealed yourself to man, that you have given us words so that not only do we have knowledge of you, but we have knowledge of what man should do and how we should structure our world and our lives. So we thank you that you are a God who does speak to all things, that you are a God who does tell us what righteousness is in every area. Lord, as we consider things like oaths and things like the civil magistrate and marriage, Lord, let us recognize that it is, as the Creator, you are the one who gets to define what these things should look like. And let us humbly come before you. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. So in chapter 23, which is about oaths, we've been talking generally about worship. And there's a very specific act of worship that's really required for societies to work right. If people's word can't be taken to be true, then your society and your ability to structure a society becomes very weakened. And so that's why oaths are important. But if you're just making an oath to something that can't enforce the oath, then you have no basis on which to say we can be assured that these things will come to pass, that we can trust the person's word. And so many societies are impoverished because people can't trust other people's words. And so when you make an oath, and people have always made oaths, whether they understood who God was or not, they always made oaths, but they would swear by things that they considered to have extreme value. So when the Jews were swearing by the gold on the temple, they're saying the gold has extreme value. And so when Christ rebukes them and says, why do you think the gold has such value? It's God who gives it value. It's because they were swearing by something and giving value to something that they shouldn't have given value to. And this continues on today, right? Like our current president. He likes to say, my word as a Biden means this will be true. He basically swears by his family name, which is what he's really saying when he does that is, my family is the most important thing to me, which you can see by his behavior as he's stolen millions of dollars to pass out to his family. And so who you swear to tells you who you're worshiping. Swearing and worshiping are always connected together. Those who believe in the true God will swear by his name and his name alone. And the other thing as we go through that is to recognize how much words matter. God is saying it really matters that you're saying, I swear by the name of God. That the words really matter. And so, it's very easy for us when we're a materialistic society to think it's actions that matter and words don't matter that much. But oaths are a testimony that words really matter. So paragraph 1, a lawful oath is a part of religious worship, wherein the person swearing in truth, righteousness, and judgment solemnly calls God to witness what he swears, and to judge him according to the truth or falseness thereof. So a lawful oath is an act of worship. It is an act to say, God, whoever you swear to, you're saying that entity that you're swearing to, that it has the ability to act on it, the ability to respond. And so if you swear by Jove, right? If you swear by a false god, if you swear by Allah, you're testifying that you believe Allah can actually do things. But we know all idols can't do anything. So an oath to an idol is meaningless. But oaths to God, who controls all things, decrees all things are in his hands, those oaths are important. And it's important to make oaths because you're testifying that God controls all things. If you say, there's never a case to swear, then you're really saying that God doesn't control all things. The reason that you do oaths and vows is because you're saying God is sovereign. He is in control. And so obviously Exodus 20 verse 7 has more application than this application, but it does have this application. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. If you swear, you are saying, God, punish me if I don't do this. You're joining an oath is a three-way covenant. It's with one person to another person saying God will be the enforcer of it. So you go and you swear before you take an oath that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It's you swearing to the court with God as the enforcer. And so an oath is where God's the enforcer. A vow is a two-party covenant. An oath is a three-party covenant. And so you're basically attaching God's name to what you're saying. You're basically saying, God, punish me if I don't do this. If I lie, punish me. If I don't follow through and do the things that I'm saying that I'm going to do. And so all of a sudden it has more seriousness to it and more solemnity to it, because you're now associating God's name with your statement. So the people who take vain oaths and they just swear things that they know are against the commandments of God, they are blaspheming the name of God. They're taking his name in vain. Deuteronomy 10, 20 through 21, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him, and to him you shall hold fast and take oaths in his name. So when you think about it, right, fearing him is worship. I mean, that's a placeholder for worship. Serving him is doing good works. And the other main way that you serve God is to take oaths in his name. Because he is your praise and he is your God who has done for you these great and awesome things which your eyes have seen. Because you know God is real, because you see him working in the world, that's why you take oaths in his name. Jeremiah 4, 1 and 2. If you will return, O Israel, says the Lord, return to me, and if you will put away your abominations out of my sight, then you shall not be moved. You shall swear, the Lord lives, in truth and judgment and in righteousness. These nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him they shall glory. And God is saying that with oaths, it is a testimony to the people around you that God is real. When you swear, you're saying, God is real, and I expect him to actually punish me if I fail. And then there's also the idea of a lawful oath. God is very explicit. For men, if you take an oath or a vow, it's immediately binding. And it's binding before God, and you'll be judged for it. But God actually, because women are under a man's authority unless they're a widow, that their husband or their father can eliminate the oath or the vow because they don't have the authority to enter into it. So Numbers 30, 3 through 5. And this is for the single woman, but this would also, later in the same chapter, talks about for a married woman. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement which she has bound herself shall stand. But if the father overrules her on the day that he hears of it, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will release her because her father overruled her. So God, even in Numbers 30, is saying he himself, if a woman swears and then her husband or her father hears about it, the day he hears of it, if he says, you're not bound by that, God will honor the authority over her. And so that's not a lawful oath if it's an oath that's contrary to the authority that's over you. Well, that's for a woman. For a man, they're always bound. That's what it says in the first two verses of that chapter. And then to judge him according to the truth or falseness thereof. 2 Chronicles 6, 22 and 23. If anyone sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath and comes and takes an oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act and judge your servants, being retribution on the wicked by bringing his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous by giving him according to his righteousness. So Solomon, when he dedicates the temple, he says, God, take oaths in your name seriously. And remember, Solomon's a picture of Christ. We shouldn't think Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father saying anything different than Solomon was. God's name is glorified through oaths. And that's the purpose of oaths. That's why they're an act of worship. Just to understand how serious these are, you have to understand about the Gibeonites. Joshua 9, 3 through 16 says, But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors. And they took old sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins torn and mended, old and patched sandals on their feet, and old garments on themselves, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us." Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you dwell among us, so how can we make a covenant with you?" But they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" So they said to him, "From a very far country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon and Og king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. Therefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, 'Take provisions with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, We are your servants. Now therefore make a covenant with us. The bread of ours we took hot for our provision from our houses in the day we departed to come to you. But now look, it is dry and moldy, and these wineskins which we filled were new, and see, they are torn. And these our garments and our sandals have become old because of the very long journey.' Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them." They took an oath. And then they found out that they had lied, they had deceived, but God still enforced that oath. That's how seriously God takes oaths. We need to understand that it may not even connect, but God takes oaths seriously. 2 Samuel 21, 1 through 9. Meaning God takes them seriously. We may not connect the judgment to the false oath, but it doesn't mean God didn't connect the judgment with the false oath. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord. So David for 3 years is wondering why the nation is under judgment. And the Lord answered, "It is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites. He broke the oath that they made 500 years before." And so God puts a famine on Israel for 3 years because they broke an oath that was made 500 years before. This is how seriously God takes oaths. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. The children of Israel had sworn protection to them, but Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. So the elders of Israel had sworn an oath, and God is saying Saul broke that oath, so that's why the Israelites are dying now, 500 years later. Therefore David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" And the Gibeonites said to him, We will have no silver or gold from Saul or his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us. So he said, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." Then they answered the king, "As for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose." And the king said, "I will give them." But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them. David had sworn an oath to Jonathan, so he can't give any of Jonathan's descendants, but instead he gives other descendants, because otherwise he'd just bring more judgment on their house. Between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, and 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Maholathite, and he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before the Lord. So they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of the barley harvest. And the famine was lifted. So God accepted that these people should die to stop the judgment for breaking the oath. This is how seriously God takes oaths. And too often in our society, we don't think oaths are serious. And God's saying, I will make my name great. People may not recognize how he does it, but he will make his name great. We were talking about a church split that we had 8 years ago, where I made everybody that testified swear that they wanted God to judge them and pour out his wrath on them if they lied. And the number of people that lied and had God's wrath poured out on them was a shocking thing. We're supposed to recognize God takes oaths seriously. Paragraph 2. The name of God only is that by which men ought to swear, and therein it is to be used with all holy fear and reverence. Therefore to swear vainly or rashly by that glorious and dreadful name, or to swear at all by any other thing, is sinful and to be abhorred. Yet as a matter of weight and moment, for confirmation of truth and ending of all strife, an oath is warranted by the word of God. So a lawful oath being imposed by a lawful authority in such matters ought to be taken. So you're only allowed to swear by the name of God. Otherwise, you're saying whoever you swear by, you're saying they have sovereignty. They can control the world, and they can cause judgment like judgment came upon the household of Saul, or came upon Israel, and then ultimately on the household of Saul. And so who you swear to, if you swear to anything else other than God, you're saying they're sovereign over God. God's the only one you can swear to. Matthew 5:33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes and your no, no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Now understand, when Jesus Christ is saying this, he's not saying if an authority tells you to enter into an oath, like you have to swear before you testify. He's not saying that. What he's saying is you should have no requirement for an oath. Christians, those who have faith, Jesus Christ is the truth. They have a duty to always speak the truth. It shouldn't require them to swear to God to speak the truth, which doesn't mean because there aren't liars that there's not a place for the church to cause people to swear, or even a father to cause people to swear, or the state to cause people to swear. But in your normal life, you shouldn't have to swear to anything, because you should have a reputation that your yes is yes, and so that people can trust you and believe that you'll do what you say. Right? James 5:12, but above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment. The temptation is to try to do what the Jews did, where the Jews would add things to it. They'd swear on their own head. You know, like President Biden, I swear as a Biden. You know, these foolish things that people do. And God's saying, you shouldn't have to do any of that. The only reason you have to do any of that is because nobody trusts you. But if it's in a situation that requires real authority, like you're going to commit, you want to prevent perjury, there's a place for oaths, but there's no need for it normally. And the fact that if it's needed normally, it just shows that you already have a terrible testimony, that people can't trust your yes. So yet as matter of weight and yet as in a manner of weight and moment, for confirmation of truth and ending all strife, an oath is warranted by the word of God. So in Hebrews 6:16 and 17, for men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all dispute. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath. And so God used an oath, so if it's sinful to do an oath, you have a problem that God used an oath. So it's not always sinful to do an oath. But the oath has to be for something that's important and significant. Otherwise, your yes should be yes. You shouldn't need an oath. But in the case where it is significant, like if there's strife, there's a place where an oath shifts the responsibility. Meaning where you may have a responsibility to enforce the law. The person says, I will swear before God that I did not steal that animal. And then what you're saying is, instead of me having the responsibility, the civil magistrate having the responsibility to punish them for stealing the animal or to prove that they stole the animal, they've shifted that responsibility to God through the oath. Because now, by invoking the name of God, it's saying God will judge them for it. So they don't need to do it. So that's why it ends strife. Because if there's strife and somebody swears before God, you're basically saying, okay, now it's in the hand of God to enforce rather than us to enforce. Which doesn't mean that you can know that somebody's a thief and he swears that he didn't steal and you ignore it. But where you don't have evidence or you can't decide between two parties, the right thing to do is have both parties swear that they didn't do it and let God judge the one that's lying. And so it's a means for, again, for serious issues to stop the strife and to bring peace, because you're basically turning it over to God and saying God will judge. And we also see Paul taking one in 2 Corinthians 1:23. Moreover, I call God as witness against my soul that to spare you I came no more to Corinth. So he's saying, you're wondering why I'm not coming to Corinth, and I'm going to explain exactly why I didn't come to Corinth. And you can know this is true, right? And again, it's ending all strife, because Corinth was a pretty messed up church when he's writing it. And it's gotten better by 2 Corinthians. But he's saying, this is why I didn't come between 1 and 2 Corinthians, is because I swear to God that I did it to spare you. And so there's clearly a place to take oaths, but it has to be about serious subjects. And subjects where your people don't think your yes will be yes. So again, a lawful oath being imposed by lawful authorities in such matters ought to be taken. It's an example in the church. Well, there's an example in the law where you swear that a woman swears that her husband suspects her of adultery. She has to swear that she didn't commit adultery, and then God will rot out her womb if she didn't. But in Nehemiah, in 13:23 through 25, in those days I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. So Nehemiah is acting as the governor. He's acting as the civil magistrate. And as the civil magistrate, he's forcing them to take an oath. So that, again, it shifts it so that he doesn't have to enforce it, because he's in a situation where it's difficult for him to enforce it. So he's saying, you have to take this oath, and I'll trust that God will enforce it. And paragraph 3. Whoever takes an oath warranted by the word of God ought duly to consider the weightiness of so solemn an act, and therein to avouch nothing but what he knows to be truth. For that by rash, false, and vain oaths the Lord is provoked, and for them this land mourns. And so, it's important, because you're trusting that God will judge. It's important not to take false oaths. Like Leviticus 19:11 and 12, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another, and you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. It's one of the most basic things that God is saying. The most basic obedience to him is to not take false oaths in his name. There's no way that you're allowed to take an oath and pretend like you don't mean what you said. God says, I know exactly what you meant, what you got other people to think that meant, so I will judge accordingly. Or Jeremiah 23:9 and 10. My heart within me is broken because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I'm like a drunken man, and like a man whom wine has overcome. Because the Lord, and because of his holy words, for the land is full of adulterers. For because of a curse, the land mourns. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up. Their course of life is evil, and their might is not right. They swore by the name of God, and they wouldn't keep their oaths. So God says, I'm judging the whole land. Now, this is being written in 1689, and in 1689, everybody's swearing fealty to the king, and they're all breaking their oaths. And so they intentionally go for this land mourns. In America, our land is mourning right now, and actually, Monday, House of Representatives will be sworn in, the Senate will be sworn in, and I guarantee before the end of Monday, they will have broken their oath. They'll swear, they'll take an oath of office, and by the end of the day, they'll all have broken it. And this is why we have inflation. This is why we have all these other things, because we don't expect men to keep their oath. And this is all judgment by God. In this land's mourning, all our problems basically go back to we have a government that swears to God and won't do what they say. And God judges a nation for that. And then the last paragraph. An oath is, no, actually there's two more, isn't there? Yeah. Paragraph 4, an oath is to be taken in the plain and common sense of the words, without equivocation or mental reservation. You're not allowed to take an oath and say one thing, knowing that other people are going to take it one way, and then in the back of your mind you go, no, I really mean it this way. You can't deceive with oaths, because God can't be deceived. He knows your thoughts and not just your words. So if you're standing there going, yeah, I can use these words and kind of twist them a little bit so everybody will think I'm swearing what they want to hear, but I'm going to really say something different, God goes, I know every one of your thoughts. And it's false worship, because you're saying God's sovereign over everything, but you're not actually treating him like he's sovereign over everything. And so you're taking his name in vain, and you should expect him to respond. Psalm 24:4. He who has, right, this is, who can ascend the hill of the Lord? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully. If you take an oath where you're trying to get people to think that you're taking an oath different than what you're saying, God says, I'll judge for that. You can't ascend the hill of the Lord. You're not my people if you do this. And then paragraph 5. So that's oath. Then there's a vow. Again, a vow is made between a person and God. An oath is between two people where you say, God be the enforcer. A vow is basically saying, if you do this for me, God, I will do this. So it's all about God's sovereignty in all of these. Because like when Hannah goes, give me a child, and I will dedicate him to the Lord. When she gets the child, she goes, okay, God did his half of the vow. Now I have to dedicate him to the Lord. And so the basic understanding of why a vow is important is because you believe that God is in control of all things. So a vow, which is not to be made to any creature but God alone, is to be made and performed with all religious care and faithfulness. But popish monastical vows of perpetual single life, professed poverty and regular obedience, are so far from being degrees of higher perfection that they are superstitious and sinful snares in which no Christian may entangle himself. So again, there's examples of vows, like in Genesis 28, 20 through 22. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. And so before he goes to where he marries his wives and comes back with the 12 children and all the flocks and everything, he says, God, if you bring me back here, then I will give a tenth. And so what does God say? This is how vows work. God actually tells him when he says to go back that it's time to pay his vow. Genesis 31, 11 through 13. Then the angel of the Lord spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. Then he said, lift your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now rise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. And so the vow's significant because he's even saying to Jacob, I've preserved you in this land. I made you prosper in this land because of this vow. So now go back to where you made the vow. Again, I use the example of 1 Samuel 1:11, which is Hannah. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give of your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And so Hannah dedicates Samuel because she made a vow. And how about the New Testament? Because it's easy to think, oh, well, those were Old Testament acts of worship. They're also New Testament acts of worship. Acts 18:18. So Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria. And Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He had his hair cut off at Cenchrea, for he had taken a vow. He took a Nazirite vow. But a Nazirite vow is also a vow that says, I'm going to dedicate this period of time to my life, of my life to God, out of thanksgiving towards God. And I'm going to put aside all family. I'm going to put aside everything else. And basically take the picture of being born again the first time by shaving everything. And then at the end of it, you shave it again to show the resurrection. So it's a picture of salvation is what the Nazirite vow is a picture of. And so Paul says, Paul took a vow. And so vows are true in the new covenant, not just the old covenant. And again, a vow is, God, if you do this, I'll do this. And it's that promise where you're saying, God is sovereign, so if you'll do something for me, I'll do something for you. And then the way you know that God accepted the vow is it comes to pass what you ask him to do. Like Hannah got pregnant. So she goes, obviously I need to pay the vow. Psalm 76, 11 and 12. Make vows to the Lord your God and pay them. Let all who are around him bring presents to him who ought to be feared. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is awesome to the kings of the earth. There's a lot of people that make vows and then they think in the minute of panic or in the middle of fear or whatever else, they make a vow and then they think they can get away without paying it. And God says, I'll make you pay it. You can't get away. I'm in control. Deuteronomy 23, 21 through 23. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which is gone from your lips, you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. There's a place where an authority can force you to swear, to end the matter. An authority can never force you to take a vow. A vow is between you and God. It's a two-party covenant. But if you make a vow, which is a good act of religious worship, if you make a vow, make sure you pay it. Then it talks about popish and monastical vows of perpetual single life. This is like the priest, right? This is a big problem because this is how a lot of the wealth of England was being pillaged by having people take vows of poverty. So the second sons would usually do that. When the first son died and all the inheritance of the lands and everyone went to the second son, they're now if they became they became a monk, then everything goes to the church. Or they became a priest, everything goes to the church. So this is why the Roman Catholic Church is by far the richest institution in the world, is because of these vows. Because if you don't have any legitimate children, you have no heir, and it goes to the church. 1 Corinthians 7, 35 and 38. And this I say for your profit, that not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and is so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. And so in 1 Corinthians 7, God is saying, if a man says, I'm going to dedicate my daughter to be single her whole life, that if he then finds out that that's not how God made her, that he can retract that vow. Perpetual singleness is not a valid vow to make to God. And so God says, yes, if you made the vow, it's better to keep it, but I'm not going to hold it against you if you forsake that vow. And same with 1 Corinthians 7, 8, and 9. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So you have, in the United States, we have all these sex scandals with Roman Catholic priests where they molest the altar boys. It's a huge problem in every diocese. It's just everywhere. And that's because they've taken a false vow, a vow that's not righteous in the sight of God, and they think they can contain themselves, but they can't, so instead they start to molest. And it's incredibly destructive. And this has been going on for at least 500 years, that it's well documented. So they're saying, no, God said you can put these vows aside. And even somebody like Luther, he married a woman who took a vow of chastity. And then after she actually heard the gospel, she ends up leaving the nunnery and ends up marrying Luther. Another false vow is professed poverty. That's also a problem, right? Because they would take vows that they would say that we'll never do any work, we'll just trust in the Lord for provision. But 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Well, how do you get poverty from that? It's not biblical. Or Ephesians 4:28, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give who has need. You are not allowed to make a vow to sin and expect that to be an acceptable vow to God. To say that you're not going to work with your hands, that's sin. You can't just go, okay, God's going to bless me, or this is a blessing that I've taken this vow. That's not a blessing. You can't vow to murder. You can't vow to sin. And then here's an important concept. In regular obedience are so far from being degrees of higher perfection that they are superstitious and sinful snares in which no Christian may entangle himself. It's really important for us to understand that the reason they do this is that they go, okay, the priest is of a higher order, the monks of a higher order, the nuns of a higher order, that they create this false sacred secular distinction and say these people are better because they've taken these vows and they're fulfilling the vows. And the opposite's true. They're treating those vows like it's what God says he hates about fasting. Isaiah 58:2-3. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching God. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice? In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit all your laborers. That's what they're actually doing. They take these vows. They're not doing it because somehow that they're actually trying to humble themselves before God. They're doing it thinking that they earn points with God, that they're this holy order, that they should be called father, that they should be called sister, that they should be called saints. They're doing it thinking somehow taking these vows puts you in a position where you're more righteous or more holy. That's not the point of a vow. A vow is like what Hannah does, where she really wants a child. And she goes, God, this is what I'll do if you give me a child. Or Jacob, who's scared to death about having to go to Ur and expects to die there and never come back home, or if he comes back home for Esau to kill him. And so he takes a vow. These are reasons for vows. They're not so, look how holy I am because I've taken a vow. The point of a vow is to humble yourself before God, not to raise yourself up. Psalm 15:4 says, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he who honors those who fear the Lord, he who swears to his own hurt and does not change. I know a lot of people that, maybe when they were younger, they were drunkards. And so when they're saved, they make, what is a foolish vow? They swear that they'll never touch alcohol again. And then they go, wait a second, the Lord's Supper says you should drink alcohol. And my answer is, you swore to your own hurt. You don't change. God said, you can take the bread and you let the cup pass because you swore never to take alcohol. And God doesn't say he'll just forget it because you did it out of a real desire to have your drunkenness go away, out of a real desire for righteousness. And so it's more like Joshua and the Gibeonites who swear that they won't kill the Gibeonites. Well, God said to put all of them to death, but then he enforces it when they go to, when Saul then goes, we need to drive the Gibeonites out of here. And so we have to be very careful about which ones to say, yes, God will be pleased if you violate that. And we should be really careful. But things that are just completely contrary to nature, where you're not trying to overcome sin, instead you think you're earning points with God, those are vows that God despises.